Earlier this year, on the 5th of May, I made a short video titled Thoughts on Changes in the Alternative Right. Now, the basic gist of that video was that I was observing, and I suppose still am observing, a trend of the alt-right, understood as a big tent of various ideologies and factions, changing and coming really just to mean American white nationalism, without any of the nuance or diversity, ironically enough, which comes from being a community on the internet with various factors and influences here and there. I've always said that yes, the core of the alternative right is American white nationalism, but for as long as I've been here, there's been a healthy community outside of that and surrounding it of various other ideological kind of currents and forces and influences. Now, my whole observation there, that the alt-right was coming really just to mean American white nationalism, is something partly spurred by things kind of being looked at from the outside, journalists taking notice, and whoever's going to be the most common and loudest American white nationalists, that's what they'll perceive and see, and the depth kind of beyond the surface will be missing and lost. So now that Hillary Clinton has done her bloody speech where she obviously misunderstands, or the person who wrote her speech misunderstands what the alt-right is, or of course they wanted to lump big bad racists in with Donald Trump, etc. All the political games that these bastards tend to kind of play. But obviously you've had a new interest take hold in understanding what the alternative right is. Many people have made videos asking this question: what is the alternative right? Myself included. So I can't fault anyone for that. It's fair and understandable to want to define something, especially if one has ties to it, if one feels oneself in some ways to be a part of it, to be involved with it. You want to make yourself clear, and you want to make yourself clear insofar as what you're doing, who you're involved with, what do you believe, and so on and so forth, who you associate with. If you write, if you make videos, these things are important because you want people to understand you. You want people to know where you're coming from, and part of that is who you associate with and who's interested in you, and so on and so forth. But Hillary Clinton's speech has also spurred Richard Spencer and various others, people who I would consider very influential and very much key people in the kind of American white nationalists alternative right scene. They are now trying to define it and give their understanding and perspectives. And this really is the cruncher. Now, the other day, just to read this little article from the Daily Caller, which I'll link in the description, the National Press Club has cancelled a meeting with members of the alternative right, and the meeting was the purpose of the meeting was to define what the alt-right was. It was a press conference, basically, where journalists would ask Jared Taylor, Richard Spencer, and I believe it was Peter Brimelow from VDare about the alternative right, what it is, what it stands for. Now, the problem with doing this is, well, it's not so much a problem, but I would say the complication in doing this is that when something like this happens, things become more tightly defined. And in doing so, you lose the big tent. You lose I've had people describe myself as being part of the alt-right, and I'm not a white nationalist. And yet, I am involved with the community. I read the right stuff, and Countercurrents, and Radix. I comment here and there, and vice versa. I have people who are involved with the right stuff. I know them personally as friends. They listen to my videos, they're involved with my podcasts, etc, etc. So you have this overlap. Again, with the internet, you have various connections here and there, and that's all cool. But when you start trying to define the alternative right so sharply as an ideology, the nature of the big tent will, well, as I described earlier this year, things will harden eventually, and they could become brittle. The community will stop being so amorphous and difficult to discern and describe and attack, we must admit, and really just become this brand of modern, young, youthful American white nationalism. There's nothing wrong with wanting to keep or lose the alternative right label. It's just a descriptive term to describe a community. However, for someone who is a content creator, obviously we want to be associated with the right things. If in 2 years from now the alternative right means something totally different than what it means now, obviously I'm not going to be using the term, and I will have to make it clear somehow, or it will be self-evident that there is a differentiation between the two. The whole shenanigan about people worrying about this, and myself worrying about this, I suppose, is the fact that it is a change. Now, I've been in this community for 2 years, over 2 years now, and I don't want to see it change, I suppose, instinctively. I don't mind seeing things kind of, pulsate and develop and grow, but to change to that extent where it becomes exclusionary. Obviously, my worry, and I suppose this is emotional, I don't want to be excluded by a community which I've invested so much time and energy into, even if my portion of things has been on the fringe or a small subsection. I don't want to feel like all of a sudden I'm not welcome somewhere. That's the worry of someone like me, and I suppose others as well. Now, what does this mean for people who aren't really white nationalists who would still identify with the label? Again, not a lot. It is just a label. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing regardless, and I'm sure everyone else is too. But my main concern, and it is really my only concern, aside from being excluded unfairly and unnecessarily, is that I don't like the idea that many people who will use this term here on out, if it does come to mean, as I believe it will, just singular American white nationalism, they will cut themselves kind of off from a lot of things to a degree. With the alt-right as it presently is, as a kind of loose and diverse network of things, you are a click or two away from basically opposites ideologically. There is great overlap between various things, and intellectual curiosity really has to be stimulated, especially on the part of young modern people. Even if they are right-wing or alternative right, there still is the matter of personal growth and of intellectual growth to be considered, and I don't like the idea that, and I don't think anyone should like the idea or be comfortable with the idea that, should this term really just mean white nationalism, everyone who really falls beneath that umbrella stops and starts at white nationalism. Because our present crisis, as much as it has its demographic, its racial, in that kind of biological sense, and political overtones and dimensions, absolutely, so does it have its moral, cultural, and philosophical dimensions. And these are, I think, elements which white nationalism doesn't really address, especially in the ways in which it needs to. There are, of course, other kind of ideological complications I could bring up. The fact that whiteness is not an identity, it is not an actual racial form, it is a descriptive term really for use in data and statistics and demographics. It isn't a homeland. White is not a language. It isn't a history. It isn't a civilization. It isn't a religion. These are details which have to be considered. What we are lacking in the modern world is form and actuality and an understanding of who we are. Who am I? What is truth? These sorts of questions. Modernity is fundamentally averse to kind of letting us understand. I don't believe it's sensible for people to trap themselves within the paradigms of a modern political system which doesn't answer as many questions as possible and only scratches the surface of contemporary problems. So, I suppose maybe I am concerned for no reason, but I figured I'd make this little video anyway, just to kind of clarify my thoughts on the entire situation, generally speaking. And hey, if it establishes a dialogue, then so be it. Thank you for listening.